So this week we're going to actually focus on perhaps my favourite subject, which is people. It's certainly a continuing moving picture in relation to the economic climate at the moment. It does make it particularly difficult for employers to know what the right thing is to do. We also are really conscious, obviously, of what happened during the COVID period and how difficult it was to re-employ people and find talent post-COVID. One of the things I do believe as leaders is it's important to be on top of people engagement, and your employer value proposition needs to be honed and always aligned with your values as a business. One of the things I'm sure you all know, but I'll say it anyway, is that it's been proven that if you engage your team, the team will be more productive, more loyal, more committed, and therefore, as an employer, it's absolutely essential that through these times you've got good communications going, and you are working with your team, and they're supporting you, your values, and your ambitions as a business. The panel today is made up of 4 illustrious members. We have Geoff Day, who is the director and owner of Wilcox Day Wealth Management. Prior to joining SJPP, which he's a partner in, Geoff worked for Standard Life and a firm called VNet. His roles were running employment benefit strategies and pension schemes of some of the biggest employers in the UK and globally. He's always had a passion for financial education, and that's been a consistent part of his career, helping people from different socio-economic backgrounds make better decisions with their money. So we have a money expert with us today. We have Alistair McArthur, who is Head of Employment Law at Harrington Carmichael. Alistair is an experienced employment lawyer with particular expertise in advising on and dealing with recruitment practices, terms and conditions of employment, discrimination and harassment, termination of contracts and dismissals, people restructuring and redundancies. So certainly he'll be a bellwether as to whether or not we are seeing negative headwinds, and we'll ask him that in a minute. We have Sally Ann Hall-Jones, who's the CEO and founder of Reality HR. Reality HR is an HR consultancy. She heads up a 20-strong in-house team of CIPD qualified people experts who partner closely with businesses to help them maximise the potential of their talent and their people. A specialist in outsourced HR services, Sally Ann and her team have extensive experience in organisations of all sizes, and they work right away across the UK with from SMEs to LMEs to agencies and consultancies. Lastly, we have Russell White, who's the director and founder of Future Work. He's a veteran, as he describes himself, for the marketing recruitment industry, having worked with most of the agency networks and the majority of the FTSE 250 companies in the UK. He's had a career over 35 years, and he's now director of Future Work, an executive recruitment consultancy that focuses on mid to senior hires in marketing, digital and data science across a range of industries and business sectors. So thank you very much indeed to all 4 of you for joining us, and indeed thank you very much to all of you. I know how busy everybody is at the moment, so we do appreciate you taking time out in your busy diaries to join us today. We're going to start with a kind of very short little 2-minute overview from each of our panel, and then we'll open it up to questions, and I've got some questions of my own I want to ask them. So let's start, if we may, with Sally, if you're able to put you into the spotlight, Sally. So I'll just do that now. Perhaps you can do that for me, Spencer. No? Okay. There you go. Thank you very much. Sally, good morning. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? I never quite trust the technology. I had a bit of an issue getting in this morning, so I'm hoping you can all hear me. Let me know if you can't. Thank you, Stephen, for that intro. I'm really delighted to be here. I've done several of these with Stephen through the pandemic, and they're always a really great experience. So I would say engagement is important all the time, but even more so now. And as a business owner, it's absolutely vital to recognise that effective businesses are grown on their people. And as Stephen said, it's proven that people are more productive, loyal and committed when they're engaged. And if you think about the current climate, those things are absolutely imperative at the moment and really are going to be a differentiator, I think, for those businesses that thrive and those that perhaps struggle. There really is that key link between productivity and success. And engagement really, for me, isn't just about showing up consistently or even doing a job well. It's about actually being truly invested as an employee of an organisation. So I think a definition is probably a good starting point. And it's really as simple as an organisation values their employees and the work they do, and the employees value the organisation, the work they do. So that is that mutual value of the two propositions, the employer and the employees. And employer value proposition goes hand in hand with engagement, and that really sets the tone for company culture and the behaviours of your people. We work with a really diverse range of organisations of many sizes across the UK and internationally. So we have a really good insight into what's going on, what businesses are doing, thinking, feeling, and what changes they're making to make sure that they absolutely do the best for their people during these challenging times. Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you very much indeed. For some reason my video has gone off. Right, I'm going to now bring, if I may, Geoff into the spotlight.
We don't need the spotlight, but
yes, we do. You're looking good in that lovely pink room of yours.
Exactly. It doesn't stand up to your green. But picking up on what both Sally-Ann and Stephen have said is we need to look at productivity. We need to have an engaged workforce. And there's no question at the moment that everybody is worried about finances. It doesn't matter how financially well off you are. There are things that are moving around us that we are not used to. And actually, one of the reasons I'm here to talk about money is when you think about your workforce, there was a financial literacy test that was done through a study. And it said 9 in 10 UK adults don't feel confident in their financial literacy. So when you're thinking about helping employees feel confident about the future, 9 in 10 don't really understand already how to make good decisions with money. And then if you roll that over, there was a study that was done by the Centre for Economics and Business Research, and it said across the UK, and this was in 2021, so just after COVID, 1/3 of people feel financially vulnerable in the UK. Now that's before we've had inflation and interest rates. Now, if you think about your business, you want productive employees, you want people that are there. But if they have anxiety around money, if they're worried about their own personal finances, are you really going to get the most of your people? And so I'm here to look at that lens of, well, what is it we can do around the benefits in financial education and well-being to just help people feel more certain about their future and actually be a more engaged workforce.
Thank you very much. I'm going to pop Alistair in there now. So there we go.
Thank you, Stephen. Lovely to be talking to you all this afternoon. I'm Alistair McArthur. I'm the head of the employment team with Harrington Carmichael. I come at it with a slightly different angle to everybody else. I am the person who talks when it all goes wrong. How do you deal with those situations when the employee is unfortunately having to leave you, whether that's through your choice or their choice? How do you manage that redundancy process to make sure you do it right so the person feels like they've had their chance to have their say, they feel engaged, so that they actually leave in a good way and ultimately protect the brand that you've worked so hard to develop? Now, Stephen said at the outset, he said, are we really in a recession? Now, as an employment lawyer, we see it first. And when COVID hit, I remember having some incredibly upsetting conversations with employers about the fact they're having to make wide-scale redundancies. Currently, we're still having conversations now with employers about how to make what I call tactical redundancies, how to reduce businesses effectively rather than broad-scale losses. But unless you're planning and thinking and looking at your budgets and how you're going to remain profitable and how you're going to manage those difficult situations going forward, you're naive. And ultimately, you need to make sure you have a plan in place for when things go wrong. And that's why I'm here, to hopefully help and give some guidance. Back to you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Alistair. And lastly, Russell. There you are. You take your off. You're on mute.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Russell from Future Work. Yeah, I mean, I think what I can add, really following on from what Sally-Ann said, is that, you know, when it comes to your employees, one of the what I hear from potential candidates is that they're kept in the dark about circumstances vis-a-vis their organizations. And I think that the way to handle any kind of situation is by being transparent with your teams. Tell them what the situation is, to really sort of mitigate and lessen any kind of anxiety that they may have in terms of their roles and their jobs. Now, clearly, you know, not everyone can be transparent about everything, but I think the more you engage with your teams and your employees about your current business situation, then the more comforted they potentially would be in terms of any situation moving forward. So yeah, so I think that's my main message in terms of, you know, how you would, you know, if you're coming to that situation where you're thinking about redundancies, just be transparent with your with your employees, and I think that they will benefit from an anxiety perspective, but equally they will respect you for being, as I say, being very open with them.
Brilliant. Okay, so lots of different perspectives on the people side of our lives, and as we know, particularly obviously in the advertising, communications, and consultancy world, that is what we're about. It's about talent. It's about creativity. It's about our ability to be able to actually use that talent to deliver exceptional results for our clients. Starting with Sally Ann, if I may, Sally Ann, you spoke about thinking about the employer engagement proposition and thinking about actually how you engage and get people leaning in and actually focused. What do you think employers can do to improve their employee engagement at this time?
I think the first thing I would say is employee engagement is not difficult and it's not complicated, but I think it's about recognizing it's the sum of many little things which actually then deliver the level of engagement that businesses need to be focusing on at this point. So I think there's actually 4 key enablers. So the first one Russell touched on, which is what I would call strategic narrative. And that's about making sure that you're telling a story, and not only telling a story, you're sharing it with your team so they understand how the business is doing, where the business is going, what the future looks like, the good and bad. So you're being completely open and transparent. That's the first of the 4. Then I think it's about organisational integrity. So I think you need to be able to have an environment where there's mutual trust between employer and employee. And that, by the very nature of the basis of trust, will build engagement. And I think that's really fundamental as well for high performance. So if the employees, the team trust the leaders and the decision makers, then that will really help in terms of engagement. I think managers are critical, a critical component part of engagement. If you can be the best leader in the world with the best narrative and the best integrity, but actually if your managers are not with you and really mirroring the messaging and managing expectations and all those kinds of things in an organisation, then that can have a counter negative effect in terms of what you're trying to achieve as a business leader. And then lastly, I think it's about giving employees a voice. So how do you get the information coming back? How do you make sure you have that communication circle in place? And there's many things that, you know, can be suggested. And I'm sure I don't need to talk to you about, you know, graffiti walls and newsletters and intranets and all those kind of things. But it's how do you give the employees a voice? And that voice will be what's appropriate for your organisation. So I think recognising lots and lots of many small incremental things that contribute towards really strong engagement, I think is a good starting point.
Thank you very much indeed. Russell, one for you, if I may. Yeah, we've seen the big tech firms in the US in particular, and the large publishers like Google, for example, cut their workforces by thousands of people. And obviously that is pretty easy to do in the US. People are laid off on a whim, it appears. Are you seeing the same reaction in agency land in the UK? Are you seeing agencies starting to depopulate?
The short answer is no. Before I came on today, I did a quick sort of look in terms of the number of vacancies very broadly in the UK. There are currently about 5,500 account director vacancies just in London at the moment, and double the number of account manager vacancies. And I think that, you know, clearly there will be some agencies, because of the types of clients that they work with, who will be seeing sort of downturns in terms of revenue, turnover, profitability, that will cut their budgets, and so ergo that will have an impact on the agency sector. But there will be other sectors that will just continue as is, or they'll be quite happy with whatever margins they're making. So as a result, I think that the impact on a lot of agencies will not be significant. Equally, there's been because of COVID, and because I think a lot of people that were working in the sector sort of weren't from the UK. They went back to the EU, went back to Australia or wherever. It created a lot of skill shortages in certain sectors within agencies. So anyone that is being made redundant, or has specific skills, particularly around digital marketing, I don't think that they will struggle to find another role, and that's certainly been borne out. That was certainly what I've seen in the last 3 weeks with quite a few candidates that I've been talking to. So yes, so in conclusion, yes, there will be some agencies that will struggle, but I think that just broadly speaking, I don't think it will be as bad as, say, it was, say, in 2008, or indeed 2000 at the beginning of the millennium, and indeed when I think further back as well, but I won't go that far back.
Okay, well, so that's largely very positive, and it's good news to hear that there are that many jobs still open. And it's a good time for recruitment companies in that case, particularly obviously with all of these publishers laying off people whose skills are very transferable. So that sounds certainly some good news. I mean, when we talk about the R word, it's a bit of a nasty word, and leaves us a block in the mouth, as it were. Are there alternatives to redundancies? Can we be a bit more creative actually in redeploying talent? Again, this one for you, Russell.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think there are lots of ways. Not lots, but there are a number of ways. I think that what I read this week was, and I think Alistair really touched on it earlier, was that the redundancy is a little bit more tactical, in the sense that it's like a bit more reorganization. But in terms of what businesses in particularly agencies can do is, they could look at things like, cutting back people's hours, potentially, obviously assuming that the employee is happy to do that. Perhaps suggesting sabbaticals, so that they can go on sort of extended leave, job share, for instance. So again, so that people can be a little bit more flexible. And then equally, looking at other areas in which businesses potentially could cut their overheads, because at the end of the day, in an agency, your most vital asset is your people, and without your people, creatives, technical people, software project managers, or whatever, they're the ones that are actually doing the work. So they are actually the most valuable resource. So consequently, if you've got large offices, and you've got people working from home, why not look at ways of cutting down your office space, perhaps sharing your office space with other people, with another business. I think I think it's about being creative at the end of the day, and thinking about different ways in which you can mitigate any kind of loss of people, because we all know that these things come in cycles, and it won't be too long before there's things start to pick up, and then you're back into the whole round of recruiting. There's shortages, the whole challenge of actually hiring people, and that will probably cost you more than making someone redundant at this particular time.
Yeah, I suppose the great thing about being an independent business, independent agencies, is you're not answerable to external shareholders and investors in the same way. Obviously, there are investors in some cases, but if you need to take a hit in your balance sheet in a given year, and it's for the long or medium term growth of the business to retain that talent, you can look at things slightly differently. than say a PLC or an organisation that is accountable to shareholders who have to somehow maintain their profitability and margins. And I think that's your point, which is actually invest in talent sometimes means actually holding talent. And if you don't have the opportunities immediately to keep them fully engaged, so be it, for the greater good of the business as you go forward. If you are in a situation where you do have to make people redundant, Alistair, what's the fairest and best way to go about the whole process?
Thank you, Stephen. I think in 20 years of practice, I don't think I've come across ever an employer who has skipped gladly and happily into a redundancy consultation process. It's not something which anybody actually wants to do, and it's not something which I've ever found an employer be joyful about doing. And I think my starting point really is to echo what Russell talked about, looking at alternatives first. Once you've removed that person, you've still got work to do. You might have to find somebody else to do it. So why would you do that if you've still got the work to do? So looking very carefully at what you're doing to start out with and showing care and compassion to the employees are absolutely critical. Generally, if you treat people with a sense of respect and decorum, they respond in that way. If you go in tough and hard, they don't. Now, there are prescriptive processes which you have to follow from a redundancy perspective, and the key number in this world is 20. If you're dismissing 20 or more people at any particular location, there's a very, very prescriptive process, and it's highly recommended that you take some legal advice on that to make sure you get that process right. But if you're doing less than 20 people at any one location, you're doing through a process of regular meetings, so 2 to 3 consultation meetings. Key issue in this space is selection. Why me? Is generally what people ask. Why are you picking me? And that's either because the role is unique or you've applied selection criteria. You might also want to consider things such as voluntary redundancy. Can you avoid the whole process by giving people the opportunity to volunteer, perhaps for an enhanced payment? But really, I go back to that care and compassion word. We're all people at the end of the day. These people have things which they have to pay for. They'll have natural concerns and fears. They'll have cost of living. They'll have families, dependents, mortgages. It just goes on, which is why I say no one goes into this space happily. It's not something which you actually want to do. But if you do it right, take some time and make sure you give the person a voice and show them some understanding. Think back to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Alistair. Okay, a question for you, Geoff, if I may. I mean, one of the things obviously we can help people with is actually, and it's the point you made, I think, when you introduced yourself at the call, is actually, regardless of actually whether you're worried about your job or whether you think you might actually end up being made redundant, and the consensus I'm getting from this call is that actually, largely speaking, I think the communications, marketing and advertising industry at the moment is in pretty good shape. That's not to say we're immune from the situation, but there's still a lot of jobs out there. But if on a day-to-day basis, are there other things as an employer one could be doing and should be doing really to try and help your employees when it comes to their own personal finance?
Yeah, I think we set up, to take a step back, we set up this group on this idea of people planning in a moving market. At the moment, Russell, spot on, it's recruit and retain, and similar to Sally Ann. Tomorrow, as we watch the economic figures unfold, we might move to recruit to retain to redundancy. We don't know quite where we're going to end up this year, and anybody that tells you otherwise is lying. Sorry, that's my sort of quite fact about it. Things have changed at a monumental pace. But that leads to that uncertainty that your employees have, is they are seeing their cost of living skyrocket. They're worried, especially the sort of younger people that have got a mortgage for the first time and probably extended themselves as far as they can. They're really struggling, thinking about, how are we going to cover our mortgage? How are we going to do this if my wage packet doesn't keep up? So if we're still at that recruit and retain spectrum, then the parts that Sally Ann talked about as what's your employee value proposition are absolutely fundamental, because how are you going to get the right people? How are you going to get the right talent when it is such a competitive job market? And so that's part that you have to think about, which is, what's your sort of mentoring strategy? What's your progression strategy? How do you make sure people feel valued, or they will leave for somebody that offers them more pay because they've got this monkey on their shoulder, which is the cost of living crisis? Now, you as an employer, you have to decide, I guess, there's the altruistic or there's the value add, and saying, well, do I want to really help people at this time feel more confident and more comfortable? Or am I just doing it to squeeze as much productivity out of them, so as a result they're not distracted with anxiety around money? Now, part of that looks at what is your employee benefits package, for example. So do you help people out with, everybody's concerned about going into the NHS these days because of the news. Well, actually, does private medical form part of your benefit offering, which people are really valuing right now? If you suddenly ratchet up the amount that you pay into pension, well, if you've got a really young workforce, they probably won't care. They're more interested if I have an issue with my health, am I going to get seen? And so you have to start to think about on that spectrum of what do you have in place. There's things like Ultimate Travel Club. If those people that have been locked in their house for years and haven't been able to travel, they want to travel cheaply. There's lots of benefits out there that could add value. I'm a massive believer, as I talked earlier, around financial education. And the problem you've got is we as a society come through education and nobody's taught us what money is. Nobody's taught us how it works. And I'll give you a prime example of a client of mine. So they're a management consultancy. They have been trying to recruit people for ages. They found a data scientist, we're going to call her Mrs. M, and they recruited for her, and they paid through the teeth for her because of the challenge for talent. Between the time of her leaving her job and starting her new job, she was delighted to find out that she was pregnant. But she's now joined a firm that has no employee benefits in place, and she's actually, the other company said the door's still open. She was about to leave and go back to the old firm. So we had a conversation around what her priorities are, and we were able to say, well, with your increased pay packet, you can actually pay for these benefits comfortably and still be cash positive at a time that you've got pressure against mortgages, you're going to have childcare costs, you're going to have all these sorts of things. So in that instance, this lady's decided, actually, I'm benefited to stay because I've got the increased money and I've moved away from benefits. Everybody's situation is going to be different. And nobody knows, they'll make knee-jerk decisions based on fear and uncertainty. And that's why I believe that financial education right now and that sort of well-being around money is more important. So how do you help people understand just how to make better choices? Give them a voice where they can ask questions. Reassure them, especially, I think it was Sally Ann talking about the transparency, and Russell as well, help them understand how you're doing as a business, because people might be terribly concerned about, I might lose my job, I'm worried how this agency is doing. Well, actually, if you can reassure them that they've got a future and they've got a good place, will that stop them from looking? Because it's better the devil they know than the devil they don't. And as a result, we have to work harder if we're at that recruit and retain space right now than we probably ever have before, because actually it's still an incredibly competitive market and people will be motivated by anything that makes them feel more secure from a financial perspective. And it's tough to get that right.
Yeah, it is tough to get that right. And Geoff, thank you for that. I think some very wise words, and I don't think as employers we spend enough time helping to educate because we don't necessarily see that as our I guess thing to do. But the reality is, it certainly doesn't happen in school. Rarely happens at university level. And if it's not your parents and you're not lucky enough to actually find somebody who is a financial advisor early on in your career, you can kind of miss opportunities in terms of actually developing wealth and so on. So yeah, good advice there. Question if I may, back to you, Russell, coming from one of our attendees today, asking about what's happening in salary inflation. Are we seeing it begin to slow down?
I think that I personally think that a lot of companies actually haven't caught up with what's happening. Some of the things that I have seen is certainly towards the back end of last year, and particularly with people who have been working from home, is that companies were making ex gratia payments to pay for energy and associated costs at home. But in terms of actual sort of salary raises, generally speaking, I haven't seen, for instance, a big 10-15% uplift within the sector. But I think companies, and just mirroring what Geoff just said, is that companies, I think, are beginning to look a lot more flexibly at their employees and sort of building benefits around what is appropriate for those particular employees. And again, I can give a pretty good example. For instance, my daughter works for one of the marketing awards businesses, and they're all flying off to Singapore in a couple of weeks for the award ceremonies over there. And so basically what the company has said is that once you go there for 10 days, and then we'll give you £1,000, and then you can fly anywhere you want in the world to, and have a 10-day holiday on us, kind of thing. And that's because they're all kind of Generation Z, and it's the kind of thing that kind of thing that they want. And if you don't want to do that and you want to come home because you've got because you're not that generation, then you just basically keep the £1,000. So I think that there is a lot of it's all about flexibility at the end of the day. And I think that again, like the public sector, the private sector are trying to keep their costs low, and obviously that's salaries. So I'm not seeing that that what I would consider to be that kind of increment, but it's still early in the year. It may well still happen later on.
Okay,
Stephen, can I just add something in there?
please. Yeah.
We're seeing what I would call a lot of responsibility from business owners not to spiral wage inflation, because obviously spiraling wage inflation is not going to help us get out of the situation we're in. So I think we're seeing a lot of thoughtful awards being made around cost of living, so one-off payments, maybe phased over quarters, linked to business performance, things like that. So we're not going to end up hopefully with a situation in a year's time where base pay increases are being made which actually are unsustainable, and which is just going to protract the issue that we're seeing in terms of the economy. So and I think I'm a business owner, I employ 23 people, and we're thinking very, very carefully about what we do to appropriately reward our team, but not take the responsibility for not spiraling wage inflation, which I think as business owners we have a responsibility for.
Yeah, it's very often, isn't it? We forget that, of course, if it goes onto the base, it means actually that's where you work when it comes to pensions. That's where you work from when it comes to bonuses very often, and so on and so forth. So, being creative, as you say, and tailoring packages for individuals based upon their needs. And that goes back to what Geoff was talking about, which is really understanding, how well equipped people are that you work with to really fully understand how to manage their money. Then from that, I'm not saying that we should, that's a very difficult area, because obviously it's an area that from an employee point of view, they will probably feel that employers are overstepping their mark. So it has to be soft education, and it has to be external, I believe, to the business. Through to then tailoring individual packages. One for you, if I may, Alistair. 2P. Are we seeing people bringing 2P back to the fore now? There's lots of pitches going on. You're probably familiar with the advertising world. If they pitch a major piece of business and other agencies employing, say, 10 or 20 people in that account, there's an obligation on the agency that's received the business to 2P across the teams. Are we seeing more of that?
Absolutely, Stephen. I mean, I'm a bit of a geek, and I do love 2P. I mean, people who've heard me talk on 2P know it's literally my favourite subject, and it's the driest, most boring piece of legislation, but fundamentally it has some amazing impacts from an employment perspective for employees and employers. We're seeing an awful lot more 2P in recent weeks and months, where what we're seeing is where organisations are having challenges, they're looking at restructuring, they're moving people around groups, and 2P catches. And it's if you're moving assets, or you're moving services, or you're even moving people, that's where the obligations lie. Getting it wrong is expensive, because there can be pay claims, there can be 13-week pay claims, there can be claims for dismissals that arise on the transfers. So it's something where if you see it, you should take some advice. And if you're involved in it, you should absolutely take some advice, because if you don't do it right, it can go badly wrong. And it's another area where you want to get people engaged. You want them to feel like they're part of the new organisation, where they come over and they're immediately bought into your brand, what you're thinking, and the way you are doing things. So yeah, 2P really is back on the rise again. It's quite exciting for people like me, which is quite sad, really, isn't it?
Brilliant.
I'm laughing because I've known everybody on the panel for a while, and I kind of now want us to have a drink at one point and talk about our guilty pleasure. Yours is 2P, mine's pensions, and it's that bit of I get geeky and excited every time I hear 2P. I've never heard that in my life.
we always kick the 2P over the fence to Alistair. It's definitely not our bag. We don't get excited by it.
Okay, each into his own, as they say in life. So it's kind of quick summary point at this particular point of the conversation. So employee wage inflation is certainly under control compared to a year ago, where we were seeing significant increases post-COVID on baseline salaries. Hugely competitive marketplace still. Lots of job vacancies are open. That said, and Laura put a note in there, you're seeing job applications for positions that are advertised through LinkedIn, typically a couple hundred people going for a job. So there's a market certainly up there to think about. Tailoring your propositions, making sure that actually you really think about the benefits for your employees, and actually also recognizing that someone who's Gen Z or Gen A is going to want a very different set of benefits and probably need different communications too. I mean, let's just talk about that for a second to anyone on the call. If we think about this, for Gen Z and Gen A, they've never been through recession. The R word is not something part they understand. It carries so much baggage with it. How do we need to communicate with them differently, perhaps, than we would with an employee who's probably 45 plus? Anyone want to take that one?
Well, can I pick up on, I'll take one point on there, which is, in my world on the financial education piece, the problem you've got in all generations, we all have different priorities. But actually right now, a lot of us are confronted by the exact same problem. And it comes down to, again, that idea of lack of knowledge. And I'll share why I say that is, for a few firms, we're on there as almost an employee benefit of, if you've got money questions, speak to Geoff or speak to his team. And actually one of the big ones right now, which nobody seems to have twigged to, and it's just simple mathematics. It's the fact that if you took out a mortgage 2 years ago, irrespective of your age, and you're in a 5-year fix, you're probably in the likely place of sub 2%. You could put that into a bank now on a 12-month fix and get 4%. So we so often get people saying, well, I've got 20 grand in cash, for example. Should I pay off my mortgage? No. When'd you take it out? Do you realize now the bank, for the first time in my living memory, is giving more on interest rates than they're charging on debt taken out 2 years ago? And that's not needing financial advice. It's just highlighting to people some factors. And then they say, oh, really? Yeah, so store up some cash, prepare to do it, fix it for a little bit longer, clear your mortgage. The weight that's taking off people's shoulders is huge. Now that's for an example. It doesn't matter the generation span. It's just trying to get is what is the problem that people are facing? And we can't assume at the moment, and that's the problem, is communication. If you assume everybody's got the same problem, then actually you can disengage quite a lot of people. And so it's how do you identify, well, this group, they're really high earners, so they might be struggling with some of these tax rules. You might target something there. This group's at a certain age, they might be worried about, do they have enough? This younger generation, they might be really struggling to think, actually, how do they get on the property ladder? Fine. But not all of them will fit in that category. So you have to be very careful on the assumptions you make as to what's really going on and the stuff that you don't know behind them. As I said, the lady that we talked about earlier, Mrs. M, she had a great pay rise to go to a firm, and almost a day in when she was introduced to advisors, she's going, this is confidential, right? Should I quit and go back to my old job? And that firm had spent a huge amount of money onboarding them. So you have to be really careful on how you communicate. And actually, as Stephen said, how do you get it right across all the different groups? And on the financial side, I don't think there's a one size fits all for each generational piece, because we all have, some of us have similar problems, but we're going to have different lenses to it.
Okay, I mean, looking across the agencies within the group, I would hazard to guess the average age of their employee base is somewhere around about 25, 26 years old. So the vast majority of those people probably are property owners, then they are probably renting. And of course, what they're seeing is spiraling costs of rent as a consequence, obviously, of landlords basically having to cover off some of the additional costs they're getting on their mortgages. That in particular, it's a really difficult one to fix for young people, because reality is the only way you can fix that is to pay them more. Are you seeing, Sally, in that situation, that employers are actually doing grants, or they're looking to support their employees who are struggling to be able to afford to live in London, for example, and they need to be close to their work, because at the same time they're being told we need you back in the office?
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is that there's a huge value on flexibility. So I think what we're seeing is, particularly where businesses recognise that there are challenges for their employees, use the rent example, but they perhaps can't afford or don't feel it to be appropriate to give increases. Flexibility really helps. So what I mean by that is, if people aren't required to go into the office, they perhaps aren't incurring travel costs, they're not going to buy their lunch at Pret a Manger, all those kinds of things. So being at home and being able to be at home and work flexibly does deliver some financial advantage. Conversely, there are businesses who are encouraging people to be in because, you know, they're providing tea, coffee, lunch, heating, and all those kind of things. Therefore, people who are renting and at home and incurring cost have the option to go into the office as well. So I think it's about understanding where people are at and what can be done to help, which may not just be about you know, cash pay increases. I think it's also about giving people the opportunity to ask and then be listened to in terms of what is it they're facing at that moment in time. And I think if you think about, you know, some of our clients will have a workforce whose age ranges from, you know, 18 through to well into their 60s. They're all going to have very, very different needs, different challenges, different requirements. So it's really important to think about not one size fits all, and to ask the question, listen to the answer, and provide whatever it is you can in the context of what your people are telling you that they need at that moment in time, because it will change, of course, as well, which is the other interesting dimension that needs to always be considered.
Sally-Ann, can I ask a question on that? Are you seeing an increase in employment surveys then going out to ask employees on a range of different topics, because almost that constant sensor check of kind of where are you and trying to get a pulse?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you, Geoff. We've never done as many employment surveys or speaking to employees for clients. We've been in business at 19 years and it's unprecedented, which is great, because it means, you know, you ask the question, you get the answer. However, it always sets a degree of expectation, so you have to be prepared to do something and communicate back. I think it's also interesting to think about the vehicle, the media for asking the question. So there is 0 point in giving a Gen A a piece of paper to fill in, 0 point. It all needs to be on their phone. But then if you think about my scenario of the 60 plus employee, then the chances are they'll quite happily sit in there and complete a form on their desktop or on a piece of paper for you. So you have to just think about, you know, how are you going to position the question, what are the questions, and then how you're going to deal with the feedback to people as well, and indeed the actions you take. I think it's the leadership teams, decision makers. I always think about it a bit like an iceberg, and there is a model that's name I forget, but you know, you sit at the top of the iceberg and you see only what's above the surface. It's what's below you need to get to, and that's what talking to employees is all about. And I will remember the name of the model in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, as a build on that, and Rich from Space 32, who we've just done a survey with him. We'd love a survey, as you do, to really understand exactly what agencies want in terms of space going forward, what they're doing now, what they want going forward. And first of all, we had a really good response. And generally speaking, when that comes to surveys, sometimes it's quite difficult to get high levels of response. But we had both good quality and also high numbers. And one of the interesting facts is that actually agencies are only primarily, about 35, I think it was, Rich, wasn't it? 36% were saying that they actually need office accommodation for Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursdays. So we have kind of that whole kind of twats thing is still very much prevalent, and post-COVID agencies aren't putting huge amounts of pressures on their employees to come back full-time into the office. Some are in certain sectors, certainly in financial agencies we're seeing that, but the vast majority basically seem to be comfortable with the Tuesday, Wednesday flexible arrangements. And that then leads me to the next question, which is employee handbooks. No one seems to have dusted those off before COVID, and I've kind of read one this week on behalf of somebody else and was looking at it, and it was draconian in nature, and it was kind of looked at this thinking this was certainly written before COVID, and I just wonder again, do we need to relook at those, redesign those, be much more conscious and aware? Because I have a general suspicion that actually Gen Zs and others, yeah, would basically throw those out the window if they were given one today. Because if you look at them, it's I mean, basically, you know, we have the right basically to terminate your employment and come around and eat your children. I mean, it's really, really nasty stuff. Have you seen much of that, Sally, that people are actually having to actually readdress that?
So I've got a view about employee policies, employee handbooks, and Alistair will probably have a view as well. So for me, it's all about setting your stall out. This is the way we do things around here, and it's not about having a tool that sits in a desk drawer or an intranet that people never access. It's just about something that is reflective of the way you engage as an employer and an employee. And obviously there are certain legislative things that you'd want to include. So it needs to be written in a way which is appropriate to the culture of the organisation. It's a key communication tool, but also it needs to be clear, concise, objective, all those kinds of things. So yes, definitely, we do lots of employee handbooks, and there are certain policies you'd always recommend are in there. There are certain policies that perhaps would just go on an on-demand basis as that situation may crop up for the employer, but it is a key communication tool. So as dry as they can be, I think they are a necessity, so everyone understands this is the way we do things around here, and this is the way we are going to engage as employer and employee. Alistair, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, perhaps I could just echo what you're saying, Sally. And I think I would go at it from the first question of why have you got one? Why do you want it in the first place? Now, if you need a set of rules, then put a set of rules in place. You know, that requirement for a disciplinary and grievance procedure, yes, you probably should have one, and you should have it laid out clearly so employees know what the expectations are. But the days of a staff manual which ran to 300 pages, which no one ever looked at, dusted off unless something went terribly, awfully wrong, are dead and gone. I don't see that so much. And I think it is a matter of looking at what do you actually need now. And broadly speaking, the law in that space hasn't changed drastically in the last couple of years. There's been bits and pieces around the edges, but the reality is that what you probably had 3 years ago, if it was up to date, is probably roughly up to date now. But it's about how is it presented, how are people engaging with it, making sure you've got your message clearly set out, and fundamentally, it's making sure that people understand it as much as anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a build on that. For me, it's about, as you rightly say, it's about how aligned is it to your vision and values as an organisation and your culture, and secondly, as you say, is it necessary at all, and are there other ways you can communicate this sort of stuff? And then finally, if you do have one, I do think you need to revisit it, because I strongly suspect that actually the world has moved on, we've changed, our expectations as employees have evolved, and if you have a document that basically was probably written 5 years ago, it's probably not fit for purpose. It might be legally fine, but actually, is it reflective of what new employees want and expect today? And is it an impediment to actually good engagement and so on and so forth?
I think, Stephen, just on that subject about employee handbooks, is that I've seen a fair few over my time, and I think one thing that I think people have to be wary about when they're writing them these days is unconscious bias, because they can be written in a way that can actually put people off and actually make people feel not part of an organisation simply because of the language that is being used in those handbooks. And when I talk about unconscious bias, it could be someone who is mentally challenged, whatever it might be, sort of thing. They could read something and they could think, well, that obviously doesn't apply for me, or that's very off-putting for me. Do I really want to be part of this organisation? So I think people have to be wary of that these days.
I think just to add to that, I think that's a really valid point. And there are many things that we're doing differently post-pandemic and in the current era. And one of the key requests for training at the moment is equality, diversity, inclusivity. So businesses wanting to do something around just, I suppose, addressing unconscious bias and all those elements which perhaps businesses didn't struggle with a number of years ago, but now are needing to be really clear about the EDI agenda in their organisations. So we've seen a real upsurge in that as well, which I think is absolutely amazing and such a positive move.
But last week we looked at some data which was tracking consumer sentiment and also business sentiment and really just confidence in general. And one of the things that was coming through was a threatening increase in people's mental health and poor mental health, and the feeling that obviously with the economy and with inflation in general, a lot of people were basically suffering from poorer mental health than they were this time last year. Remembering that obviously it got progressively worse during COVID and lockdown, improved post-lockdown, but we are drifting back to the same levels of lockdown. Again, are we in agencies and business in general doing enough to equip people to both recognise poor mental health and secondly, as employers, particularly at the moment, how should we be behaving, and what should we be doing to actually address that in the workplace? Anyone?
Why don't I jump in? I'll take that one. I think that the fact is that mental health is a topic which we are all acutely aware of, and also not just mental health, but people's different levels on spectrums, how they behave, how they interact from a disability perspective. And it's really important that you do, as an employer, recognise somebody is in a different mental health capacity state, because they will need additional support, they'll need additional adjustments, they'll need additional help from a legal perspective. And if you're not doing that, you're sitting ripe for a claim, sitting right there. And I've got more claims on my desk at the moment in relation to disability and mental health than anything else. So I would really encourage, if you have people who are in need, to grapple with it, care and compassion, show understanding, look at adjustments and see how you deal. And I'm sure Sally Ann has more wisdom on that as well, for dealing with the HR side of it.
I think, thank you, Alistair. Just to add, I think the key thing for employers is, and particularly with anybody in an organisation who's responsible for other people, line managers, is to understand, to have some knowledge, some understanding of mental health and well-being, be able to recognise it, but importantly not try to fix it, because we're not mental health professionals. It's about being able to recognise and then to signpost appropriately, so to help the individuals with where and encourage where they can get the appropriate support and input. Employee assistance programs have come a long way and are really fantastic. They offer some really, really fabulous support for employees in a confidential way, and are really cost effective for employers. You know, £1 per employee per month, you know, that kind of figure. Geoff will probably have some other examples. So, and they're amazing in terms of allowing employees to access confidentiality, some help and support. And then I think it's also about recognising, as Alistair said, the differences, the diversity, and people having different needs, different requirements, and at different points in time, because people's mental health and well-being is not fixed at a point in time. They may have a certain situation, a certain need at a certain point, but then, as with physical health as well, there will be improvements and changes. So it's fluid. So I think it's about being able to recognise, understand, and signpost are the key things.
I'm just, Sally, I'm picking up on your point earlier about the iceberg. It's an analogy that sort of is very prevalent. And I've always seen mental well-being as often the tip of the iceberg. And, when somebody gets to that point, they need employee assistance programs. They need somewhere to go because they need that help. They need that confidentiality. But as an employer, you have to think of, well, what actually within my organization is potentially leading to that? Is it the fact that we've told everybody work from home, it's somebody in a bed sit with 5 different people where they're now locked in a room for 8 hours a day, they feel like they're in prison, they don't get out. That was a problem we had during COVID. Is it now with the financial side? Is it, there's lots of reasons that people are feeling that anxiety and stress that can then manifest itself. And a lot of times we focus on the mental well-being side. But I think as an employer, you have to think, well, what do I have in those verticals that might be leading to it? So I can feel I'm doing as much as I can, but then I don't want to be the mental well-being person that is trying to deal with that. I need to give them an outlet where they can go for help if it goes beyond what I can do from a company policy and approach and how we support people. So it is coming back to that example, Sally Ann, that you used, is mental well-being for me is the tip of the iceberg. It's what's underneath it, is that leading to it is something we all as employers need to work on.
Yeah, and not wanting to draw this to a conclusion, but recognising obviously we're pressing towards midday now. The thing that strikes me is obviously is all of this is about good communication. All of this is actually about having a strong, engaged workforce, and you and managers being acutely aware of where each of your individual talents are on all aspects of their lives, and understanding exactly if their kind of financial requirements, understanding exactly their mental requirements, understanding actually what training and development requirements they have, because we haven't even touched on that today. And of course, one of the things that tends to get thrown against the wall at any time there's a downturn, particularly in the communications and marketing industry, is training and development. Unless you have a PDP, unless you have a program in place, unless you have those opportunities to have those conversations, that's when you actually tend to find out actually how people are and whether they are suffering from any problems. So I guess the conclusion for me from today's conversation, which has been, we've tried to cover a huge subject in an hour, and I'd like to thank you all for joining the panel today and giving us your advice and insights, and for everybody that's actually had the time to kind of listen in. Really helpful session, useful session, and I think things that we should all be thinking about as employers. But for me, particularly now, if people are working remotely, you don't have those water cooler moments. You don't have that free flow of communication always. Find ways in which you can actually engage, communicate better, and actually get to the root cause problem in order to both retain, attract, and grow your talent. And secondly, be aware that, as you rightly said, Geoff, it's the tip of the iceberg. You don't know actually what you're dealing with. You don't know the pressures that people are under. But as if you want to grow and develop your business, you need strong talent, and the best way to do that is to engage and get close to them and understand.